What's up, Wanna Coffee fam? It's Kai, and we are back, kicking off season 2, and things have slightly changed for us. We will have weekly contributions from strangers all over the world discussing various topics chosen by yours truly. And this is the first time these contributors have spoken to one another, so you are in for a real treat. Without further ado, here's Chris and Ethan with Religion versus Magic.
Recording now. Hello, my name is Ethan. I'll let my partner introduce himself.
And my name is Chris.
I believe today we are going to be talking about religion versus magic. I'm gonna put Chris on the spot here and try to make him start the subject.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting title because, to a lot of people, there might not be much difference there. I am not really a religious person myself. I kind of was raised in the Midwest, Christian and all that, Protestant. Didn't really ever have to go to church or any of that stuff, but it was definitely kind of the culture around me. Everybody was fairly religious. I grew up in a small town, so pretty much not really hardly anything other than Protestants. There were a few Catholics, no Jewish people or Muslims or Buddhists or anything like that. It was just kind of expected that it was kind of taught to you that God was real, the Bible was the truth, and nobody really questioned it. Once I went off to college and kind of started learning more about the world and history and other religions, I remember sitting in an ancient history class where I was learning about ancient Greece and like their religion. And I just remember thinking, like, wait a minute. So before we had Christianity, everybody knew beyond a doubt that there was like the god of war and the god of rain and all these other different gods they prayed to and all that stuff. And
Right.
I was like, I was like, that kind of made me start really questioning, like, well, if people knew for thousands of years that these religious views were correct and everything, and then all of a sudden some other people came in and killed them and for not having their religious views, and now everybody's saying that this is correct, it kind of makes me think that none of it's correct. And so I eventually kind of just stopped believing in religion completely. I have friends and obviously that still do, and I respect that, but for me it's kind of just like, I don't know, it's created by a man to kind of serve some purposes. For me, I don't see it as magic necessarily, but I definitely think it's not real.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, thank you for that. I was raised Buddhist. Never really got deep into it or anything, right? It was honestly more cultural than anything. My parents are from Vietnam and they're all Buddhist there basically. And certainly growing up, I would have to go to a Buddhist temple every Sunday and then pray on my knees and chant and et cetera, et cetera. Never got into it though. Was never really ingrained into me or seriously indoctrinated.
Mhm.
But in undergrad around there, I was sort of struggling individually. I somehow, more or less, very long story short, actually got into, I don't want to say got into as like it was a fad. I started being introduced to Christianity, and I think I was pretty, I think I did believe it, right,
Mhm.
during that time, but almost, I have to say, almost immediately after, became very jaded about it, became very um, skeptical of it. A lot of it stemming from social issues and normal everyday issues, right? That like are staring you at the face and they're just contradicting everything that most religions have to offer and say. Um, and it's that interesting thing of like, I that's a great thing you brought up of how let's say before the time of Jesus Christ and Christianity as we know it today, at least, or Western Christianity,
Mhm.
and how before then all of these civilizations had some form or another of mythology, is what we would say right now, right? We would call it mythology because that's what the word, that's sort of the idea we're using: myths, legends, fables. I don't
Yeah.
think those people back then who believed in it so ingrained would have said, oh, my belief in the god of thunder is a myth or a mythology, it is my religion, it is it. I don't even know if they'd use the word religion as opposed to it is a part of everyday life, much in the way people fully accept nature as it is now,
Mhm.
and how we treat these ancient religions as mythologies now, how we treat them as the idea of magic. A lot of these like ideas of our fantasy and science fiction stem from these old mythologies of what we consider magic, right? Dragons,
Mhm.
wizards, uh, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty fascinating, especially because like my area of interest and what I got my degree in was like history. I went to school to be a history teacher, and I've just always kind of been obsessed with learning about history of different places and different cultures, and history of religions and things like that, and learning about like the history of kind of Christianity, because like most people I know but kind of are identify as Christians really have never even read the entire Bible, which is kind of mind blowing to me. It's like, how can you believe in something that you don't have never even read, or at least haven't read fully? But and then they don't really have any idea of the history of the church as well, because I ended up having to do like a 10-page report on like the history, the entire history of the church from like the founding up till like the present. And it was kind of mind blowing to me to find out that like the first couple hundred years of Christianity, there was like, I don't know, something different, like eight, let's just say there was 8 different versions of Christianity kind of out there competing. And then eventually one or two kind of became the main dominant ones that kind of gained the support of the emperors of the Roman Empire at the time. And they kind of started killing off the other believers. Like that started like pretty early on in the history of the church. And it was like,
Pretty
so
classic
even
religion.
like, yeah, it was like even like very close to the days of Jesus, like there was no agreement on like, the divinity of Jesus, like this Holy Trinity thing that's essential to Christianity now. That was hotly debated for the first couple hundred years of Christianity. It was not like accepted by the people that were much closer to the time of Jesus. So it's interesting to me like how we just accept it as fact now based on like nothing, but the people who were maybe a generation removed from Jesus's time had very wildly different views on Christianity and the Holy Trinity, and like whether or not Jesus was divine or human and all that kind of things. And all these reports of like lost books, and different sects had different books in the Bible, and they kind of had to have multiple meetings about which books were actually going to be in the Bible going forward. And it's very interesting, the history of Christianity. Like I don't know, I think that might be more unique to Christianity, because I don't think Islam has necessarily had that. Or I don't know much about the history of Judaism, but and I have no idea about the sacred texts of like Hinduism or Buddhism either. So maybe that's something they've dealt with as well. But yeah, the history of Christianity is very fascinating, but very few people really know it.
That's an interesting fact too, because you're right. Now, obviously, I don't have great insight into, as you say, Judaism, to Hinduism, to these other religions that aren't necessarily influenced or factored one way or another into the classic Christianity or Christian religions.
Mhm.
Maybe at some point it became consolidated because, as in the history of human civilization, it's always being used as a political tool by those in power, one way or another.
Mhm.
Um, I would say maybe there was a period of time where it was much more consolidated, but I feel maybe now, as with the proliferation of media and how easily accessible everything is, it has
Mhm.
never been more fractured in terms of ideology. I
Mhm.
feel like there is a word for multiple versions and forms of Christianity today. Like more, I would say maybe more than any other religion in terms of like, they all have a different version of Jesus Christ or a different version of the Bible or different rule sets, right? Or different things they focus on within the realm of or phrase of Christianity, or maybe as a tangent or parallel Catholicism, etc.
Yeah. 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 It's definitely true. Yeah. Because I feel like pretty much all the religions that are practiced in the world right now are from roughly around that same time. I know that Hinduism's kind of unique because it's like kind of stretches back to kind of what historians call like the old world, like before kind of the Christianity and Islam, and even I can't remember when exactly Buddhism kind of came to be, but I know Hinduism's been around for at least 4,000 years, I think, whereas like Christianity's 2,000 years, and Islam's only what 1,400 years, something like that. So it's kind of interesting, like just the life of these religions and kind of like how they get kind of co-opted and kind of changed a little bit over time for political purposes, and then passed down the generation to generation. And it's really fascinating too how like with colonialism and all that stuff, how it's just kind of gone global, which is pretty unprecedented in like human history, whereas before religions were always kind of like regional, and now it's you have like two or three religions that kind of dominate the world, which is really weird.
Yeah, it is a very weird thing to say and conceptualize and more or less acknowledge is the case, at least for present day, modern today. I'd like to go back to this idea of like, once a religion gets, I don't know how a better way to say this, but perhaps past its date of acceptance as in vogue.
Yeah.
Maybe expiration date or something for let's say, for instance, we'll go back to Greek mythology. It wasn't mythology to the people back then, right? It was everyday life. It was accepted. It was absolutely accepted. Everybody believed in Hades, Zeus, the god of death, and the consequences of these things as not mythology, but as accepted everyday life. At some point or another, these things transform into, like I said, the mythology, and how they then gets further influenced and transformed into maybe the headline was we're talking about magic, what we consider magic now, or taboo, for instance.
Yeah.
I would say all of these things likely have origins in actual archaic or old world religions, and they become these things where you make new media about dragons, wizards, magic, dwarves, trolls, right?
Yeah, it's definitely true. Especially before like the monotheistic religions, because they all kind of, I mean, they differ in their ways, but they all have like some similarities too, because they're kind of explaining natural phenomenons that people had no scientific understanding to explain. So it would just be like, if you were getting earthquakes, it was because you would upset, this deity, or if you were getting a tsunami, it was because you would upset this deity. That kind of helped them understand the world around them. And then, the monotheistic religions were kind of like revolutionary in that before them, you never really, that I can recall reading about, ever had people like going to war or trying to conquer people simply for not believing in their god, because everybody kind of believed in a god of thunder. For example, you might have given it a different name, like the Romans called their war god, I believe, Ares, and the Greeks called it something else, but they both had a war god, for example, and he was pretty similar in like his characteristics, because it all came from like a more ancient culture that kind of passed on this idea. So like with the Vikings, for example, they called their god, I forget what he exactly was, but everybody knows of Odin.
Right.
There was the people that had conquered England centuries before the Vikings. The Vikings then later came and conquered. They referred to the same god as Woden. So it was like obviously they kind of borrowed that from a similar ancient past ancestor that they both shared at some point, and then they kind of broke off and kind of, you know, changed the name just a little bit, but the characteristics of the god remained pretty similar. So it was like they weren't killing each other for religious differences. It was more like, I don't know, I feel like their reasons for fighting were more honest. They were just like, no, we're coming to take your stuff over because we think we're stronger than you and we can. Whereas like then once Christianity and Islam came around, it was like, you know, we're killing you because our God wants us to. It's like, does he really?
Do you think that's really interesting? Do you think it does, right, get influenced by the very simple fact that you go from a polytheistic religion or culture to a monotheistic, right? Because the idea of inherently being able to believe in many different gods, inherently, like you are able to accept there is more than one god. Why
Right.
would you fight someone over believing in one god over the other? Because you both already understand, well, yeah, of course there are multiple gods. Why wouldn't there be? You wouldn't even ask that question. And then you
Yeah.
get introduced to this people or culture or political power that says there is only one God. Therefore, it is impossible for you to even think of multiple gods. And if you do, we now have a reason to go to war. Or, I will make a reason for us to go to war now because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I would love to just transport myself back to that transition period and just kind of like hear what people's thoughts were on that. Like cuz that's, I mean, you had, for as long as we have like recorded history, you had multiple gods, and then all of a sudden it came along like, hey, this one group of people in like the area we call Israel now believes in one God. And then that kind of morphed into Christianity and morphed into Islam. And I mean, they almost took over the entire world and like pretty much eradicated most polytheistic religions. I mean, India was able to hang on, and Asia was able to hang on, but well, I still don't understand Buddhism because I don't think that it necessarily has like a god in the sense that like we in the West would I think of a god.
So,
Um,
right, yeah. So there's that thing too. There are obviously the religions that, or at least people label them as religions, for instance, Buddhism. But here's the thing: when I got old enough to really understand what it was that I was being sort of fed as a child,
mhm,
I don't ever really consider Buddhism as a religion. And I think that the monks who commit their lives to it wouldn't
mhm,
necessarily consider it a religion either. It
yeah.
much more closely follows what you would consider a philosophy. Um,
Mm,
um, but then we're getting to semantics of what gets qualified as a religion, what gets qualified as a philosophy, at least in the sense of Buddhism. Um, at least the Buddhism that I was raised on, it is the idea of a way of life, not a being to believe in, or to put all of your faith in, or to rely on, right?
mhm,
It is much less external than the other religions, where it is about a relationship with an entity.
mhm,
Buddhism here is much more about like internal and like being connected with, say, the natural order of life, reincarnation, things like that. That there is that they probably, there is that belief of like there is a system for life and the rebirth of life, but it's not
mhm.
like a single entity that sort of drives all of that.
How I'm curious to know because you said your family is Vietnamese. Well, yeah, you have a
Yes.
Vietnamese last name. So I'm curious because I did a study abroad trip where I kind of traveled across Asia and visited a lot of Buddhist temples and saw a lot of like old Buddhist temples from like, up to 1,000 years old and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But one thing that's kind of interesting to me as I've gotten older and kind of just understood like the role religion plays and like politics and government and stuff is how did have like Asian kind of leaders and governments throughout kind of I don't know, recent or even longer history, how have they used Buddhism towards like nefarious means? Because that seems to be what governments always do with religion. But Buddhism doesn't have that component that all the other religions that are still kind of big right now have, where there's like parts in your holy text that are celebrating like killing people that, you know, didn't share your beliefs. Buddhism doesn't have that. So how did they use Buddhism in like nefarious ways?
So that is actually a really interesting question. I would love to explore that more with you. We are coming up on 18 minutes, however.
Okay.
And I think to try and give a semblance of an answer on that, as I turn off
Yep.
the timer real quick. See, that's interesting because there is no central figure that you can like prop up on a big placard and be like, this god tells us to go to war. Um, I would say people, those in power, when attempting to create nefarious means, didn't need to do it through religion.
Okay.
Yeah, they just came up with cultural reasons, which there were plenty of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess we can talk about that off.
Yeah, that's I think a very different thing. We're kind of running out of time, or honestly out of time. Maybe just leave on this thing where, like, you know, all these old world historic archaic religions have now gone the way of mythology, fable, things we contribute to magic now. I wonder, and again, this is many different subjects we can discuss about. Very blasphemous of me, but at some point, do you think Christianity will hit that as well?
It definitely will. It's kind of hard to say when, but I'm sure the people that were worshiping the Roman gods, never thought that a monotheistic religion would come replace theirs, and it did. Religions always get replaced eventually, so I'm sure Christianity and Islam will as well. It's just who knows what'll cause that, but history always repeats.
Yeah. Chris, this started out a little, you know, could have been anything, but actually we ended up opening up a lot of subjects that I honestly wish we had more time to discuss at some point in the future. Maybe we will.
Yeah, great topic.
I think we hit our time. I don't want to keep going too farther and take up more of your night. So
sure.
I'll say good to stop here. It was great chatting with you, Chris. Hopefully again.
Yeah. It was great talking to you. And hopefully we can maybe do another part of that conversation later.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. You have a good night, Chris.
Thanks. Bye.
Certainly lots to unpack there, and you guys did an incredible job of discussing religion in a sweet and thoughtful way. Thanks a lot, guys. That's it for us, folks. Catch us next week for a brand new episode with brand new contributors. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Wanna Coffee Pod. That's Wanna Coffee Pod. I'm your host, Kai, and let's Wanna Coffee next week. Cheers. Oh my God, orange is not my new black.